We now welcome our final candidate this evening. Please welcome Controller John Liu to the stage. Hi. Since John just walked in, we will recount the format and the guidelines of what will happen over the next 25 minutes, so he knows. You are in a forum being hosted by Democracy for New York City, Act Now, and Living Liberally. We're at the Tank, a nonprofit venue that has donated itself for this public affairs event. I'm Justin Krebs, the founder of Living Liberally. I am the moderator this evening, asking questions that have come from the audience. Every candidate who's here is getting 25 minutes. So we ask you to keep answers relatively short so we can get through as many questions that the audience asks as possible. Some are questions that the other candidates were asked as well. Some might be specific to you. I will give you a heads up when it's the final question, and then after the final question, we'll also give you a 1-minute closing where you can summarize what you're up to. I'm keeping clock. Everyone is in a good mood still. Everyone's still energized.
Great.
For our final headlining closing candidate tonight, I ask you to give us an introduction of who you are and why we should be excited about your campaign, John Liu.
Thank you very much, Justin. Great to see everybody here. Actually, I can't really see anybody because the light is right in my eyes. So I see bodies, I see silhouettes, but that's all I can see. But I want to thank the organizations for putting this event together. I want to thank Justin for being the host, and I guess Tracy for putting together all the arrangements with my office. I was excited to be here. It's been a little more than 3 years now that I've had the privilege of serving as city controller during a period that's been very challenging to be chief financial officer of anything, let alone the great city of New York. And it's been a time when I've been able to look into pretty much every single city agency, look to see what they're doing that's good, what they're doing that's not so good and can be improved upon. I'm proud of the record of saving billions of dollars through our vigorous auditing and contract review, stemmed the loss of additional money by rejecting contracts for projects that really were tremendously out of control and wasting and bleeding taxpayer funds. As controller, it's also been my responsibility to invest pension funds. Very happy to report that over the past 3 years and change, we are well over 40% in cumulative returns. So our pensioners and therefore our taxpayers can rest at ease when it comes to our pension returns. And of course, we've accessed the capital markets to take advantage of very low interest rates to not only refinance tens of billions of dollars of outstanding city debt, and therefore saving more than $1.5 billion in interest cost alone. But we've tapped into that kind of economic environment to put together job creation programs such as my capital acceleration plan, where we took projects that were already in the pipeline, projects in terms of school construction, road and bridge repair, park improvements, pushed them up in the timeline by borrowing money now at lower interest rates, saving taxpayers money overall in the long run, and creating jobs, badly needed jobs today. So it's been a privilege to serve as controller, and I feel that because of my experience, I know city government inside out. And coming 2014, we're going to need leadership that is going to represent significant change. I do believe we cannot have the status quo or anything near the status quo. Significant changes are needed in the city of New York. It's a city that I grew up in, lived in pretty much my whole life. I think Justin's telling me my time is up, so I look forward to answering all the questions, and I prefer to answer questions because then I can really talk about what you are most interested in. Thanks so much for having me.
Terrific. Yeah, and you're welcome to share ovations. The first question is the first question we've asked of all of our candidates, and actually it segues really nicely with where you just ended, which is a two-part question. If elected, what part of the Bloomberg agenda would you retain, and what would be one of the changes that you make first?
Okay. So let me take a minute for the first part of the question,
Absolutely.
And I might need the rest of the night for the second part.
Take as much time as you need.
The first part of the question, I think the mayor did well in his first term. I think his second term was preoccupied with this presidential run, and the third term was absolutely a mistake. And I fought term limit extensions every step of the way, even though I did not support term limits as a voter. I certainly didn't think that it should be taken away without another referendum or changed in any way without another referendum. So the third term never should have happened. Anyway, I think some of the things that he's done that I would continue would be, for example, some of the health policies, particularly the anti-smoking measures that I think have been very successful. Smoking, where secondhand smoke really kills other people who had nothing to do with making any choice to smoke in the first place. So those kinds of health policies I would continue. I think the commercials have been effective. Some people have criticized the expenditure of those commercials. I think they're pretty effective, and they certainly have had an impact on my son Joey, who at this point is 12 years old now, so he's completely grossed out by any of that, and I don't think that he will ever try any kind of smoking in any form. I think his advocacy on topics like immigration would be things that I would not only continue, obviously I would expand upon them. So there are some things that he's done well. I only get to choose one thing that would do differently.
Well, tell us where you start. What would you do first, and give us a few.
The first thing I would do, or the first two things I would do, would be number one, change the economic development policy of this city, and number two, change the long-term economic development policy of our city, which happens to be education. The first thing is I see a tremendous amount of waste that's going out the door, taxpayer subsidies, loopholes, and outright grants that have cost taxpayers billions of dollars over the years, going to big companies and developers that were supposed to create jobs, and in the majority of the cases, as we found in my auditing process, created no jobs. And the responses were appalling. Not only were there no jobs being created, we found that City Hall and the Economic Development Corporation wasn't even checking in with these companies to see how many jobs they created long after they got our subsidies and our accommodations. And the Economic Development Corporation had the audacity to come back to my office and respond that, well, technically, in many of those cases, the contracts did not actually require the recipients of these huge subsidies to create jobs. I think it is a policy that is absolutely wrong-headed. It's a policy that curries favor for big people, well-connected companies, and at the expense of small businesses and entrepreneurs, none of whom get any breaks whatsoever, none of whom get subsidies. They, in fact, pay all their taxes and then some, because there are all these fines and violations that amount to backdoor taxes that are revenue raisers and have little to do with public health and public safety. The second thing I would change right away is the education. Education is something that I think has gone seriously wrong in the city of New York. We have now a system where each school is pretty much considered a business division of DOE Corporation. It doesn't work. What we need to do is restore the learning environment in each and every school. It's not about the Department of Education and the Chancellor and the Mayor handing down these mandates and then requiring every school, including the teachers and principals, to continuously feed back statistic after statistic after statistic, justifying that they are indeed complying with all these mandates coming from the top. We need to actually create learning environments, once again, restore the learning environments in our schools. And the only way to do that is to actually allow the teaching professionals to teach, whether they be teachers or principals or other staff in the schools. You got to give them more, you got to trust that they're going to be professionals. And this Department of Education doesn't trust teachers. And that doesn't make any sense. And my son Joey, when we talk about Department of Education, he refers to his teachers. He doesn't refer to any chancellor or mayor. He thinks of the teachers as the Department of Education, because that's who the bulk of the Department of Education is made up of. And so we need to allow teachers to teach once again and get away from the coaching of all these high-stakes exams. I believe in more testing, but testing not by the form of once-a-year high-stakes exams where so much hinges upon the outcome of these tests. More so, I think that we should return to the days of pop quizzes every week or so, or every other week, and keep the students on their toes, and also use the results of those tests, the pop quizzes, as diagnostic measures. But of course, in order to encourage that in our schools, we actually have to let teachers be the professionals that they are and encourage them to do so. So economic development and education, my top two changes.
Terrific. Earlier this evening, Bill de Blasio was here, and he outlined a plan that he just recently proposed to expand pre-K and after-school programming. Do you have a plan? I'm not going to ask you to comment on his plan unless you want to, but do you have a plan to also expand pre-K to more New Yorkers, and how would that work?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. I do believe that universal pre-K should be universal. For years, I have talked about how half-day programs don't work, and some of this will require the support of our state legislature, which has given us tens of millions of dollars that have gone unused in the city of New York. Over the last several years, we've returned close to $200 million of universal pre-K dollars because of the restrictions that they had to be used for half-day rather than a full day. We need to convince the legislature to allow those funds to be used for full-day pre-K. So that would release tens of millions of dollars on a yearly basis. I also think that our education system we have to focus on early childhood and even take it into the family for certain more needy families. Take it before the kids are actually eligible for even pre-K. But we also have to change the emphasis on schools. I think our public school responsibilities in the city of New York should not end at high school. We should be encouraging college graduates. There's not a person in the world who would say that a college degree is not necessary for the 21st century economy. And rather than encouraging students to go on to college, we should expect every high school student to go to college and get their college degree. To the extent that maybe some of the high school students aren't able to do so, we will give them alternatives. But the expectation should be college degrees, not the encouragement. It should be an expectation. And so I've got a plan that would increase the proportion of New York City residents that have college degrees from the current 42% up to 60%, increase it up to 60% by the year 2025. I think it's necessary just to maintain our competitiveness with other major American cities, which were falling behind. And that's not to mention other global cities that we actually have to compete with nowadays. Now, getting back to how do we pay for these educational measures, whether it be expanding pre-K so that it's truly universal on a full-day basis, or expanding our college programs through the use of, for example, free CUNY tuition to the top 10% of high school graduates, or additional guidance counselors. Those will be, the cost of all these measures will approach a couple of $100 million. Now, what I've proposed is, I have proposed an income tax reform that is not just about a surcharge on the millionaires. It's about surcharge on the top 1%. I'm sorry, it's about an increased rate on the top 1% of income tax filers in the city of New York, and the cutoff being 500. Excuse me. The cutoff being $500,000 a year or more. They would pay a percent to 1.25% more in income tax. That would afford the other 99% of taxpayers to get an income tax reduction. Right now in the city of New York, we've got an income tax system that is essentially a flat tax. No matter how much money you make, you're paying almost the same rate of tax. Teachers, cops, and firefighters are paying pretty much the same rate of New York City income tax as Michael Bloomberg. So we've got a flat tax that actually has been soundly rejected everywhere else in the country. But in the city of New York, where the income tax was always meant to be a progressive income tax to counter the property tax, I mean, to kind of balance out the property tax that tends to be regressive, in the city of New York, we still have a very flat tax. So the curve that I've proposed would be an increase for the top filers, the top earners, a decrease for the vast majority of other filers, and that would be a far more equitable system of income tax, and it would yield anywhere from $250 million to $1 billion of extra revenue on an annual basis for the city. So it then becomes part of the budgeting process to decide, do we dedicate excuse me, do we dedicate a couple $100 million of this additional revenue for pre-K, for additional guidance counselors, for more CUNY tuition, expand our educational array of services, or do we look for the things like, for example, we've got homeless policies that clearly need to be fixed in the city of New York. There are a lot of priorities, budget deficits as well, that need to be fixed. So my plan does create the additional revenue, actually more revenue than my buddy Bill's would, but it would not be an earmarked revenue. And let me tell you the problem with earmarked revenues. I do not support earmarked revenues because they never work in the long term. The classic example is the earmarked revenue from the sale of lottery tickets in the state of New York. That money was supposed to be for education. Somebody could have said that money should have been for pre-K education. Bottom line is it was meant for education, and the lottery money was used for education. Just like this surcharge on the billionaires or the million or the people making $500,000 or more would be reserved for this particular purpose. But the problem is that just like with the lottery funds, you start cutting down on the funds that were already going to that purpose in the first place. So though technically your dedicated revenue is going to that purpose, you're starting to remove funds that were already going for that purpose to other things. So it really doesn't work in the long run. What we need to do is a long-term sustainable comprehensive income tax policy, and I believe my system of fair income tax, progressive income tax rates for New York City taxpayers would achieve that and would give the extra revenue that would be needed.
So when you talk about revenue, you're inevitably talking about something that involves the state and state legislators. Mm-hmm. What makes you, compared to the other candidates in the field, more qualified or more able to get from a somewhat difficult, recalcitrant Albany the changes and agreements we need?
I don't necessarily think all of Albany is recalcitrant. They could be difficult, no question about it. But when the mayor of New York City, along with the majority of council members, and I do believe this is that these kinds of tax measures would be supported by the majority of council members. When there's a very strong home rule message with the mayor truly behind it, it's not that difficult to pass a measure in the state legislature that the measure of which only affects New York City residents. So these are common sense tax proposals that I put out there. I haven't talked a whole lot about reinstating the commuter tax. I would love to reinstate the commuter tax, but it's easy for anybody in the city of New York to talk about how people outside the city of New York should be paying more tax to the city of New York. So I don't really talk about that. That would be very difficult to get through the state legislature. And I support it. But it's not something that I talk about because it's not practical for New York City candidates for office to keep harping on that. If I was elected and I got into office, then I would use every tool at my disposal, every chit that I may have, every ounce of bargaining power that I have to get the state legislature to restore the commuter tax. But for candidates running for office in the city to talk about taxing people outside the city, at some level, I feel it's a bit disingenuous.
So let's talk about something that is in control of the city. Mm-hmm. Paid sick leave. The bill has not been voted on. It's out there. Do you feel like it is a good bill? Does it go far enough? And as mayor, not only would you see it into action, but what kind of paid sick leave would you like to see for all New Yorkers?
Well, thank you very much. I support the paid sick leave bill that's currently in the council right now. It's already been, there's already been compromises introduced into it, so it's not the full measure that was originally introduced. I do believe that people who work in New York City should have paid sick leave, and that there are all sorts of claims that it'll be detrimental to the economy, that now is not the right time to put it in. There are no conclusive studies that say that paid sick leave is actually detrimental to the economy. In fact, I would argue that it's very beneficial to the economy. When people go to work and they're sick, they're not productive, and not only that, guess what? Invariably, they make other people sick. And so those people become less productive. I think what we need to do is have a policy that allows workers in this city to take off from work and expect to get paid and not to lose their jobs if they stay home trying to take care of themselves. So paid sick leave is something that I support wholeheartedly. I think it's actually good for the economy, but I can't claim that I have a report that shows conclusively that it's good for the economy, but neither is there any report that shows that it's not good for the economy. So it's time to get that passed, and if you add to the arguments the additional real-world understanding that the lack of paid sick leave today disproportionately affects women and disproportionately affects immigrant workers. These are the people who we really need to bring more equity to. And so for all those reasons and the others that I mentioned before, we do need to have paid sick leave.
Talking about health, there's a question that came earlier tonight from somebody who visited a friend at Lincoln Hospital who lives in the South Bronx and has asthma. The asthma rate in this area of New York City is 8 times higher than the rest of the country. How do you feel about companies like Fresh Direct moving 1,000 or more trucks in and out of the polluting area? And more broadly, what would you do to help those areas where the environmental injustice is most harshly felt to reduce asthma rates and increase public health?
That's a great question, and it's something that I worked on when I was a member of the City Council, trying to get some of the bus depots that are concentrated in the northern parts of Manhattan, and really were spewing tons of fumes in those neighborhoods that really had already high asthma rates, like they do in many parts of the South Bronx. The vehicles that we have nowadays tend to be cleaner vehicles, so we're going in the right direction. One thing that we clearly need a big improvement on is the school buses. School buses are among the most polluting vehicles that we still have in the city of New York. When I was a member of the City Council, I introduced measures that would curtail, excuse me, that would retrofit school buses, all school buses, with cleaner burning engines by us. It was within a certain time frame. I think it was too long. It was longer than I would have liked to see, but nonetheless, it was enacted into law. Also, put in a bill that was ultimately passed into law that limited car idling in front of schools to not just 3 minutes, to not as long as 3 minutes, but limiting it to 1 minute because of all the exhaust and the fumes that were affecting kids. In the case of Fresh Direct, Fresh Direct brings up a lot of other issues for me, but they say that they have cleaner trucks on the way. I think that remains to be seen exactly how successful or how quickly they will bring the cleaner trucks. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to keep cutting you off. But the Fresh Direct, the issue there for me is the fact that they're concentrating a truck delivery service in the neighborhood that already has very high asthma rates. There have been attempts to close one of the highways in the Bronx, the Sheridan Expressway, and turn it into a greenway. And I think that's something that would be very positive for the people of the Bronx and help start cleaning up some of the air in that area. So, please, go ahead. But I gotta say this about Fresh Direct, right? That this is, when I talked about giving subsidies to companies, I mean, $130 million of taxpayer money given to this company who threatened to move to New Jersey. I argued Fresh Direct is never going to move to New Jersey. Their customer base is right here in Staten Island. They've got a growing base in Brooklyn and Queens, and now they're trying to get into the Bronx. They're not going to have the trucks go back and forth across the GW Bridge or Lincoln Tunnel or Holland Tunnel. And yet, $130 million. I mean, $130 million, if we didn't give that away, we wouldn't even be talking about any budget decisions right now. No after-school programs being closed, no elimination of daycare slots.
So to move from the South Bronx, slightly further south, there's a neighborhood that's asked a lot of questions tonight.
I see the green shirts.
What would you do with the 91st Street transfer station?
I have said that I supported it when I was a member of the City Council, not the site specifically, but as part of the overall solid waste management plan that was passed many years ago. That waste management plan, by the way, also included a waste transfer station very close to where I live. And so it was an equitable balance. Excuse me. It was an equitable balance across all the 5 boroughs with regard to the burdens of trash and waste removal. And but I have also said that in the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy, where it became clear that there was the site was located in a floodplain where you could potentially have a site that's vulnerable to storms like Superstorm Sandy, which nowadays don't seem to be 100-year storms, but seem to be coming every other year. We need to rethink and relook at the location, the location for these kinds of sites, of transfer stations. It's a huge investment. it's a huge investment of taxpayer money into it, and so we have to make sure that it's not going to be destroyed or made too vulnerable with these kinds of storms.
So our time is passing quickly. There's going to be one last question, and then after you answer this, you'll also have a chance for a closing. It's been almost 25 minutes already. But to talk about Hurricane Superstorm Sandy for a moment.
By the way, I got plenty of time, so I'm not in a rush to leave. So.
Well, maybe we'll either ask a few more, or we'll let the audience that's been sitting for a while get up and stretch and come up and talk to you personally as well.
Anybody wants to leave, I won't be offended. Anybody wants to stay, I'm happy to stay.
All right, that's a fair offer. So one more question, and then we'll give people a chance to leave, and we'll go from there. But you said on Superstorm Sandy, obviously makes you rethink waste transfer stations. That's not all it makes us rethink.
No, not waste transfer stations. The location.
Oh, sorry, the locations obviously.
Yeah.
What other plans or platforms for how we rebuild, how we think about our environmental impact have you proposed or have you made part of your campaign since the impact of Sandy?
Oh, well, I think we do need to look at additional storm protection measures, rebuild, reconstruct, and also improve our drainage systems so that if water does get in, it can leave pretty quickly. Look at raising some of the seawalls right up against the water, and ultimately, in the long run, take some lessons from Rotterdam, from London, even.
It's the second time she's cheered for the Netherlands tonight.
That's right. And KELJ is pronounced K. Yes, right? That's right. I got a little Dutch lesson on the way in. And so look at what they've done in those cities and possibly erect some kind of storm barrier or protection system that can be turned on as a storm approaches us. Now, the cost of these measures are humongous, and the discussion about all these kinds of systems, better drainage systems, higher seawalls, possible storm barriers buried in the sea or in the harbor or the rivers, those were all ideas talked about in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, where the experts said that New York City was just as vulnerable to that kind of storm as New Orleans was, thousands of miles away from us. And I think people in New York City just didn't really want to think about it or couldn't get our arms around the humongous cost. Well, we now see that the costs of this kind of storm is going to be in the tens of billions of dollars. So the equation has been completely changed. It's no longer a question of can we afford these kinds of systems. The question, I believe now, is can we afford not to have these kinds of systems? So in the long run, we do need the improved infrastructure. In the short term, we need to rebuild housing and other immediate city assets that have been destroyed by Superstorm Sandy. I've allocated $1 billion of New York City pension funds for economically targeted investments. We announced the first $500 million specific investments last week that would rebuild much of the housing that's been destroyed and some of the public infrastructure. So I think the rebuilding is underway, but we clearly need to think about not just rebuilding, but improving and shoring up the physical protections that we have as a city.
Great. What we're going to do now, we are going to ask the controller to give a closing statement out of pure equality of all the candidates getting 25 minutes on the stage, after which time those of you who have been here for 2.5 hours have every right to get up and stretch and leave. But anyone who wants to stay, we'll keep the space open a little bit longer, as long as the tank will have us, to ask questions either formally or informally, depending on how many people stay here. So we're going to close the official session and then invite you to stay. But I would ask you to make a closing statement for those who need to leave. What else you want them to part with tonight about your candidacy?
Thank you very much, Justin. Over the next few months, we will hear much more about each of our platforms. I have a set of progressive Democrats that I'm running against in the primary, and it's probably not all that different that the positions that we will take. But I think that we have different backgrounds, and I believe I have the most unique background out of all these people. I'm an immigrant who came to the United States at an early age. I never thought that I would ever run for office or even have the chance to run for office, let alone actually get elected. My mother was amazed the first time I got elected to the city council. It was a tough race, and in 2009, she was again very surprised that I was able to win a citywide election. So at this point, she's saying, you know, maybe give a shot at one more thing, and but she still wants me to go back to medical school and do something with my life. Most of
you
my
also
life,
have a Jewish mother?
yes. But also most of my life has been in the private sector, having nothing to do with government or politics. I worked for 14 years as an actuary, and when there was a chance to run for city council and give something back to this great city that gave me and my family tremendous opportunities to pursue and in many ways achieve the American dream, I took a shot at it, thought it was going to be for a few years. It turned out to be 8 years in the city council, and now in my 4th year as controller. It's a great city, and I'm going to take every opportunity I can to give something back to this great city so that generations of others can have the same opportunities that I had. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.